what we're going to talk about is who we really are, and what the central problem human beings have. It occurred to me, before we get into those, so last week we did a summary of yoga in those four main paths. But before we get into the qualities, it occurred to me that it'd be best to find out who we actually are and what is the challenge, what are the challenges that a yogin is facing. And also, quite frankly, does anyone remember the definition of yoga from last week? I see a few returnees. You do?
Yes.
Yes! Speak it loudly.
The union between the soul and the higher soul. So essentially the link between ourselves and the higher self.
Exactly. So yoga, a lot of people have heard that yoga means union of mind, body, and soul. Last week we discovered that it doesn't. We read scriptures to prove it. Yoga scriptures. Actually, I'll say this. I don't even know how that got started. If you read yoga scriptures, it's consistent. And that's the cause of like probably dozens of yogic scriptures. But it means, the term yoga means union. It refers to the union of the individual soul with the original soul, or the supreme soul. Do you remember how that is accomplished? It was a verse Krishna, who is God in the yoga system, said. He said, all these practices of yoga have their goal in one thing, meaning they're all meant for one thing. How does the soul unite with God?
Neutralizing the mind. Mental activities cease, and then you find peace.
Woo! I got goosebumps. Look at her. She can't stop smiling in her ear. Thank you. You know what? Sada might testify that was the most precise answer ever. Like literally. Thank you.
Verbatim from you. I cheated on my notes.
You know what? All the tests here are open book. I don't know why people don't do that more often. Literally, I ask a question and it'll be right in front of me. I was like, hey, I agree. Thank you. But no, that's it. So, union with the divine is attained through neutralizing the activities of the mind. Actually bringing them to cessation. Famous verse, Yoga Sutras, Yogas Chitta Ritti Nirodha. We went over this last week, so I'm not going to get too deep into it because we have another topic to cover, but I'm just reviewing. Yoga is bringing to cessation, meaning bringing to an end, the whirlpools of activity in the mind. Then the next verse says, then the seer sits in her own true nature. And so that actually is going to lead us into what we're saying. So the first thing, I'll tell you, this is where the game changes. When you realize that you are not your mind. You're not your emotions. You're not your physical body. You're not even your intellect. That you're pure consciousness and you're beyond that. And once the mind is stilled, Patanjali, who wrote the Yoga Sutras, said, the seer sits in her own true nature. Meaning you're actually become, who've heard of witness meditation as a technique, where you actually sit as the witness of your thoughts and feelings? That means you're the seer, and all of these things are actually external to you. Yoga, this union with God is nature. God is our own true nature. It's a return to our own true nature. And so that's accomplished when we realize that all of these things that we identify with are false. They're not what we think we're not our mind. Typically we go through life thinking that we're our mind and emotions, right? Or how about this, the ego? So actually today what we're going to actually talk about, because this is really essential to the foundation of yoga, is what is the mind? What are the emotions? What is the ego? So I think that's what we'll do. So remember I said we got to know who we are to know where we're going, what we're doing. So this is yoga philosophy. And what we're going to talk about is the self, the soul, and what's called the subtle bodies. So remember this. Remember I said yoga is bringing to cessation the activities of the mind. We're actually going to explain why that is scientifically. And also what we're going to talk about is who we really are. and what the essential problem human beings have. So I'm going to state this. You know, for my classes, I always like to say, this is going to be on a test. If you had a high school teacher, like when they want you to remember something, and not just remember it, actually be able to know it. So this is on a test. The essential problem that all human beings have and that all yogis face is that we misidentify ourselves. We think that we're what are called the panchakoshas. Panchakoshas means the 5 subtle bodies. And not even just the panchakoshas, the other bodies as well. So the essential problem that human beings have is they identify with their covering. So we're going to get into it, but all of these are coverings on you, the soul. The soul is pure consciousness, and she's covered by subtle bodies, but having come to a place of illusion, the soul thinks that she is the bodies, meaning the soul thinks that she's the ego. Right? And in practical terms, nearly every human being functions in this way, or the emotions or the mind. So a yogi's process is to step back from this illusion, to withdraw the consciousness out of that illusion, and to situate it in the true self. So what are we using true self? So the term self actually is, I should have put this up here, I wrote it here. It's Atma. That's on the test. There's a few essential words to know as a yogi. Atma means self or soul. It's probably the number one word to know, right? So Atman refers to both God and the individual being. So how about this? According to yoga philosophy, everything is one. Everyone's heard that before? Yeah? Actual facts. It is an illusion that me and Shukri are different people. It's an illusion. It's a heavy illusion. How do you feel about that?
I'll believe it though.
Yeah, in fact, we are actually all one, and it's an illusion that it is. And so basically, without getting too much into the details of this, basically imagine this. So people say why and how, right? So what is this great game about? It's called Leela. Leela means the play of God. So people ask, what's the purpose? What's the point? Imagine this. You're God. You're infinite. You're omnipotent. You're omniscient. You're everywhere. And not just that, you're everything and you know everything. It's just you. What can you do with that? Well, I mean, you can do a whole bunch of things there, but one of the things you can do, a great game to play, is to pretend that you're not everything. You can pretend that you're not one. You can pretend that you're not omniscient, you're not omnipotent, right? You're not omnipresent. And in fact, because you are omnipotent, you can create a super elaborate game. You can create something called the Mahatattva. The Mahatattva is described as a shell or a covering of illusion that the divine casts over a part of itself so that it can play games of illusion. And the energy that is created from the Mahatattva is called Maya. Maya means illusion. So you call the Mahatattva the shell of the material worlds. So this is the first difference between spirit and matter. Spirit is what is called Sat. It's real, meaning it's eternal, it exists, it's unchanging. That which is Asat, and when you put an A in front of a Sanskrit word, it's a negation. So that's something good to remember, actually. That's a good little tool to know. When you put an A in front of a Sanskrit word, it's the opposite. So Sat means that which is true, eternal, existence, and real. Asat is that which is not fundamentally true. Appears to not be eternal, and does not have a grounding, or is not the same as absolute reality. So spirit is defined as absolute. The material world is defined as relative, meaning it changes, where spirit is always the same. So we are spirit. God created worlds of illusion so that she could play in them and pretend that she's infinite amount of beings rather than just one being. And so what's happened is this Atman, which is the self, and the reason that Atman is called the self in English is because it's the original self of all beings. It is your highest self. As, what is your name again? Lancelot. That's right, I remember. Okay, as Lancelot said. So the self creates, or not creates, sends forth out of itself what are called souls in English. And the soul and the self all have the same qualities, right? And so these are the qualities, let's get into those, of the soul or the self. First is Sat, meaning I already said the eternal, real, always existing. Chit, pure consciousness, meaning it's pure awareness without judgment and without emotion, without thought, right? No fear in it, no desire in it. It's just pure existence. And then Ananda, that means bliss. This means our nature itself is bliss. And why do we feel more at peace and happier when we meditate? Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, when the mind is stilled, the self within is already reached. It actually says this repeatedly, and it says this in multiple scriptures. Once you still the mind, I'm going to talk about why that is scientifically, you've reached your inner self, and that inner self's nature is bliss itself. Has anyone ever felt that, right? Everyone felt like once you get into that peaceful state, I have a saying, peace is better than pleasure. Because pleasure naturally alternates with displeasure. If your happiness is coming from getting your senses pleasantly stimulated or getting your mind pleasantly stimulated, getting something you want, guess what? Your senses are going to be unpleasantly stimulated. And you're going to lose what you want. Or you're going to find out it's not really what you thought it was. Or you're not going to get what you want. That's the nature of the beast. You can't change it. So the yogis have figured that out, and they realize that the best thing and the only stable source of happiness is the inner self. The supreme self is described in three different ways. First is called Param Atma. So another word in Sanskrit, another good word to see. These are words that will pop up if you actually study yoga. Param means supreme. I will say this, in the English language, this word tends to be exclusive, meaning there's only one champion, right? And the supreme excludes everyone else. This word is not exclusive in Sanskrit, meaning there can be multiple forms of the supreme. It just means once you reach the term Param, it means there's nothing higher than you. But there can be multiple forms of Param. So Paramatma means the supreme soul or the supreme self. Brahman means impersonal spirit, impersonal energy of all of existence. Also pure consciousness. And then Bhagavan means God as a person. Here's the thing. Some people will say God is not a person. And you know, somebody explained this to me, and actually I would agree with this. I wouldn't like to use the term call God a person simply because of the way the human mind works. If we project onto God that it's a person, then we think it's supposed to act like a person should act, feel like a person should feel. Totally false. It's a mistake to anthropomorphize God, meaning it is a mistake to think that God would be limited by human qualities, or that God would think like a human. In fact, it's, if you really start to think about it and you step out of the human point of view for a second, it's actually, we're all idiots to think that. Like it's the infinite. Look at us, right? God is far beyond even our conception. We can't conceive of it properly. I mean, we can have conceptions about it, but to actually go into it, you have to experience it. But having said that, there are those who say that God has no personality, or there's no personal aspect to God. Well, that would make God limited, right? If there was no personal aspect to God, or if God couldn't manifest as a personality, that would mean God would be limited, right? We can manifest with personality. God does too. And that person manifests as what's called Bhagavan or Ishwara. You'll hear that term also. Ishwara means Lord. The reason this is good is because we're embodied and we have form, we have physical form, because our minds are trained that way, and the mind is the key to our liberation. There's a debate that rages in Vedic circles. Vedas are the scriptures of India, right? Hindu circles, yogic circles. And it says, well, is it better to focus on God in which of these forms? As a supreme self, as impersonal spirit, or as God as a person? I think, from my experience, now everyone, there are sects of the Hindu religion which fight this out. Actually, which shows that human beings are prone to illusion, because it says in the scripture from called the Bhagavat Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam, that in the higher realms there's no philosophical wrangling or argumentation, which occurs only due to men's propensity to fall into illusion. People who know don't argue about things that they already know is true. But in practical terms, from what I've seen, you're going to have to know all these aspects to know your true self, right? And in fact, scriptures go on repeatedly. Krishna summarizes it. The reason I use Krishna is because Krishna is Bhagavan. It's called Padam Bhagavan. In fact, some places called Swayam Bhagavan, which means the original form of God or Lord. People can debate that, but Krishna figures prominently in the scriptures. God talking himself. He says in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, there's a question. He addresses this. Which is best for human beings? Should they worship Brahman, the impersonal spirit, or should they worship God in a physical form? I mean, in a human-like form. And Krishna says, you'll get to where you want to go by doing both if you're sincere, right? Meaning you can worship impersonal spirit, light, energy, whatever you want to do. Or you can pray to God. It has to be a form of the supreme, though, and not all the deities, not even all the Hindu deities are the absolute supreme. They've all manifested from the supreme, but they're not all the absolute supreme. In fact, in Hinduism, for the record, the only beings who are the absolute supreme, Vishnu, Shiva, Durga, Parvati. So Durga is, Shiva Shakti. Has everyone heard that term? Right? So that's the male, female form of the Supreme. Vishnu is another form of the Supreme. Krishna is a form of Vishnu. In truth, all the other gods have come from them. Actually, Krishna even says that in Bhagavad Gita. But he says, for those who are embodied, it's very difficult to focus your mind on something that's completely impersonal. So he says, it's easier and less troublesome to form a personal relationship with the divine by visualizing it as a divine and getting what we call an Ishta Devata. I'll put this here. I recommend everyone get on this immediately. Ishta Devata means chosen form of the divine. Meaning that aspect of the divine or form of the divine that you have a heart connection with, that you can just get into. Make sure it's pure. But that's typically the way a person makes the most advancement. It's not even just that they latch onto a form of the divine. Actually, the truth is, all of us have a relationship with the divine, right? And usually all of us have a form of the divine in our original selves. So we connect with that, and that helps us advance. And so those are the three aspects of God. These are the three qualities of God. The soul possesses the same qualities. It's just so the soul is God individualized. Rumi described it perfectly. He said, so we've heard, we're all drops in the ocean of God, right? We're drops of water, and we're all together in the ocean. So if you take a drop out, it appears to be individualized. Put it back in the ocean, you see it's all one. It's got the same qualities, right, because it came from the same place. I like that analogy. That's a good description. Everyone get that in terms of the soul and God? Rumi goes further, though. He says, you're not a drop in the ocean. You're the ocean in a drop. And that's actually even more accurate, right? And so the soul, again called Atma, so let me write this down. The soul, the term, just for distinguishing purposes, is called a Jiva Atma. That's the individual soul. So that's just to distinguish between the individual soul and the supreme soul, which remains one. Anybody ever heard of Jiva Mukti in Yoga Center in New York? No? Yeah, anyone? Okay, so Jiva means individual soul. Mukti means liberated. So a Jivan Mukta, or a Jiva Mukti, person who's Jiva Mukti, is an individual soul who is liberated from Maya, which we're all not liberated from, even while in the physical body. So that's actually a goal. The yogi's trying to get free of Maya, free of illusion, trying to realize that we're actually this oneness, we're God, and we're under the illusion of individuality. Jivan Mukta has realized that and transcended karma and still has a body. So that's where that comes from. Jivatma is the individual soul. So what happens is this. I said the self sends out individual parts of itself into the Mahatattva. It gets covered by the energy of illusion. And then the self creates what's called material universes, which are still spiritual universes covered by illusion, creates levels to those universes. Large planes of existence for human, not just human beings, all types of beings to take birth on. Now those levels, now there's two higher than this, we won't talk about them, called the Buddhic and Nirvanic planes. So in our universe, there are 7 major levels of existence. And I don't have space to write it here on the board, but the highest one is called the Nirvanic plane. The next one is called the Buddhic plane. Quickly to give a description, the Nirvanic plane, how about talk about beings who manifest there? The reason we're not going to talk about them too is because, to be honest, from a practical perspective, human beings would not have any direct conscious interaction with such beings. In fact, such beings at the Nirvanic plane are not individualized fully, meaning they're still part of the oneness and then partly individualized. Nirvanic beings connect spirit to all the various universes. And get this, the universes are infinite. Right? So if you think about infinite universes, bring it down to our universe, so many galaxies in it, bring it down to our galaxy, so many solar systems in it, bring it down to our solar system, this planet, bring it down to this planet, nearly 8 billion human souls, or souls walk around in human bodies. So if you see where we are compared to a Nirvanic being who connects universes together, humans wouldn't practically have a lot to do with that person in their journey yet. Buddhic beings connect universes together. The reason the causal plane, so it's called causal, is because that is where individual universes are manifest or caused, and from there, lower planes of existence are created. And this is where what I call, it's not genuine because it's, how do you call it? It's still all illusion that we're individuals. But genuine individualization takes place. That means where people will appear as an individual. So these bodies are coverings on the soul, which allow the soul to function in the material environment related to that particular body. For example, we all here in a physical body. Is everyone aware that the elements that compose your physical body are virtually the same as that table? Is everyone aware of that? Right? And also the bodies are fed by the same elements of that environment, meaning you're eating food which has the same elements in it as your body does, right? So that means your body, your physical body, allows you to interact with this physical world. Does that make sense? It's like a spacesuit for this particular place. So each of these planes, these are all planes of existence. And the soul, being pure consciousness, gets bodies at each of these planes of existence for it to interact there. However, all souls have what I call a primary plane of experience and expression. So remember, the pure soul, oh, by the way, let me just say this. Consciousness equals energy. This should be clearly understood, and that's a super big point. I should have brought it up sooner. So what is energy? Consciousness. Energy comes from consciousness. It comes from spirit. Give you an example. Scientists haven't nailed this down. Why is your heart beating? Anyone?
Because blood is flowing around it,
No. Actually, blood's flowing because the heart is beating. It's the heart itself that's pumping the blood.
because we exist.
That's actually right. But when you say we, what do you mean? And when you say, yeah.
I exist.
True. But so... Ego. Okay. But what do you, I want more. I'll run with that. How about this? Right. Because we are souls. The soul, consciousness is energy. So we get into deep science, and I've actually explained this in other classes, but it's an electrical spark, right? The heart, everyone know that the heart functions on electrical energy, and that's the nervous system. What is the source of the energy, right? It can't be the body itself, because once the soul leaves, the body is as inert as that pillow. Correct? Right? It is the presence of the soul which gives the spark of energy, which is translated as electrical energy, which gets the heart pumping, which gets the blood flowing, which gets the nervous system going. The nervous system then stimulates the glandular system and everything else. It's present in the soul. This living force of the soul is called Chaitanya. And it exists in different qualities based on the consciousness. For example, everything is consciousness because everything is God. But this glass, the Chaitanya, is so reduced that it appears absolutely inert. Whereas my Chaitanya is much more activated. So therefore, I can move around, I can talk, etc. That's what makes the body work. Anyway, so we here, at least most of us, have as our primary plane of manifestation and expression the physical world. So we have physical bodies. What that means is our individual consciousness is concentrated here on earth through the physical form. So what that means is most of us, what happens is as we descend into matter, we actually get coverings at each stage. So all of us actually have a nirvanic body, a buddhic body, a causal body. And what's next is, so these are the planes. Like, so I said, it's nirvanic, buddhic, causal, intellectual, mental, emotional, and physical. The third plane is actually a buffer zone. It's not actually a full plane of existence. Some people might claim it is, but actually it's a buffer zone. It's the energy between the physical and non-physical. Largely, this realm, these three things are called the astral plane. Everyone's heard of that. Astral plane is largely the plane of the mind. So, does everyone follow me? So, everyone with me so far? You're an individual part of the soul. You come out of God. You go descend through matter. You get coverings on the self. You take an individual plane of existence. What happens is if this is your primary plane of expression, for the most part, the higher up you go, the bodies will be less active, less motivated, because the energy of the soul is not concentrated in them. So most human beings will have inert nirvanic bodies, inert buddhic bodies, and remember I said because the causal planes were individualized in states, they'll have causal bodies, but even their causal bodies won't be very active. They'll have intellectual bodies. This is when the activity increases, right? Because it's closer to the physical. So everybody's intellectual. But I'm going to be honest, relative to other beings, as beings go in the universe, human beings are very low consciousness, not very smart. No one should feel disappointed like that because nobody's human. But you typically, the human intellectual and wisdom bodies are not very activated. And also it's part of a great game too. Remember, all beings are equal no matter what. However, the next plane is the emotional, and then the mental and then the emotional. Everybody's got very active mental and emotional bodies, right? So how about this? So now we understand what it is. Your pure consciousness, your mind is a body, and it's a covering. Your emotions are a body and a covering, and that's actually why they stay fairly consistent day in and day out, right? You can't see them. People are like, where is the mind? The mind exists on the mental plane. These planes are subtle, and they actually pervade and transcend this plane. In the same way, when I describe the subtle realms, I always go to an example of water, vibration, right? So fire, do you know what heat does actually when applied to substances? It causes atoms to vibrate more quickly and to spread out. And so that's why fire dissolves things, because the atoms are vibrating more quickly and dissolves to spread out. So if you take heat out of water, what happens? The atoms slow down. They condense. It becomes dense. It becomes so dense that you can't pass through. You take 2 ice cubes, hit them together, right? Add a little fire to it. Becomes water. Water can merge. It can flow. You can still see it. Add more fire to it, more heat to it. Becomes vapor. In a concentrated form, you can see it. Disperse it even further. You can't even see it, but it's still there. Everyone agree? That's how the subtle realms work. That's how these realms work. They're vibrating at a higher frequency. They're existing here right now. We typically cannot perceive them. Mystics can, and practiced yogis can. And all of us can perceive it to some degree. That's where your mind exists. That's where your emotions exist. That's where your intellect exists. They all exist as bodies. So the Sanskrit word for ego is ahamkara. Aham means I am. Kara means body. So the ego is the body of the I am. The ego is the first covering on the soul when it comes out of spirit. Why? Because it's playing a great game of illusion. And so the ego is the covering that gives you the illusion that you're not one. Does that make sense? It gives you the illusion that you're an individual. First product of this illusion, right, is the idea of separation and fear. And the first reaction of that is to protect and to care for me, this individual. And that's how egotism works. Does that make sense? And so our goal is to transcend this selfishness, which comes from the ego, and to return home. The reason the mind is the key to it all, so the causal body, how about this? So other beings so there's tons of beings in the existence is full of life. When a soul decides not to descend to lower life, say a soul comes out of the Godhead, it may just go to the causal plane. It may not go to lower planes, right? And so the causal plane is actually the plane of the gods. What we call the gods, for example, Ganesha, Sarasvati, Guanyin. They're actually causal beings. They're higher states of consciousness. And the causal plane is the plane of super consciousness, direct perception of truth. So all of us have had that. How many people have gotten, they call them moments of enlightenment, epiphanies, where you've gotten like a download, bing, right? When it's genuine, when it's pure, when it's a direct perception of truth without any doubt, then that is coming from your causal body usually. It might come from spirit, but it'll come through your causal body. These beings live in those bodies. They literally live in truth. Once you break through from, and that's why Ananda Maya, Kosha, Ananda means the body of bliss. Vigyan means the body of wisdom. Mano means the body of the mind. Prana means energy. Anamaya means physical. once you get past the causal to the astral plane, things get more dense, heavy, vibration slows down, illusion increases. The mind becomes a problem. Causal beings don't even have a mind, not a mind as human beings have. The intellect becomes a problem, actually. The mind and the emotions literally become heavy, and then you're contending with them, because remember, if your consciousness is concentrated here, and you're trying to get back to here, what's in the middle? Your mind and emotions. That's why you have to neutralize them to return to your true self. All right, so there you have it. That's a summary of who you are and what your challenges are. Any questions?
Sorry for my English. According to you, what's the purpose of God? Is it to know himself? What? Maybe you talked about it before, and maybe my English is too clumsy to understand it. And how can we contribute? If it has a purpose, maybe the conscious has to be conscious of itself, or what do you think?
How about this? These great questions. I was telling Sada the other day that, you know what, when I have a question or get confused, this will come up in my classes, I go to somebody who knows. So I'm a channel, so luckily I talk to divine beings and they actually give me answers. So I have to pay a price for that, but I do. So I can tell you what Archangel Metatron said and Archangel Gabriel said on those two questions. So first of all, God is simply existence. So she manifests her own purposes. But in terms of us, why would God do this with us? Metatron said, God desires experience. God desires movement. God desires expression. That is why you exist. And I'll say this, the celestials say this as well, there's nothing substitutes for experience. Right? Have you noticed that? Once you experience something, you got it on a different level. Now, of course, people can experience the same thing and get it at different levels, etc. But what I mean is, if you haven't experienced something, your knowledge about it is still going to have some limit. Even a God from the causal plane who can see everything in your mind, who can see everything going on earth, can understand it at levels we couldn't even contemplate. If she doesn't come here and experience earth, she still lacks that experiential understanding. So God wants experience. And so God is experiencing herself through us. And then you said, how can we contribute? Gabriel said this. He said, you're already part of God. It's just left for you to decide what part of God you'll be. So how can you contribute? However you want. You're God. We recommend light. No worries.
So I had a question. So when we meditate, we get more clarity, I suppose, what I understand, and we sort of lose our ego. Does that also mean that people who meditate are nicer people?
All right, how about this? First of all, there's a few things about meditation. The devil's always in the details. I have this phrase that I learned. You get what you worship and you become what you meditate on. So it's not sufficient that we meditate. It's what are we meditating on? I used to use this example. You can chant mantras, but imagine you chant hamburger, hamburger, hamburger. Right? It's probably not going to be to your ultimate benefit. Right? And so we should be careful about what we choose to make as our object of meditation. However, true meditation is stilling the mind, and this is why it works. What happens is once this is all cut out, you're connected to spirit and to your own soul automatically. Right? And so that's how meditation, so if you target your own soul, if you target your higher self, if you target God, if you target truth, if you target love, if you target light, and you cut this out, you're automatically connected to it. Did I answer your question?
I was also wondering more on the side of niceness, like let's say a person who is kind to others and things like that. more around the society.
But what do you want to know about if people are nice?
So, does it mean that one of the goals of meditation is to become more moralistic, like more?
Oh, right. No, here's what I'm saying. Remember what Gabriel said. You can choose your goal in meditation. So I think that's highly individualized. But is it more specific to you, the question?
No, in general, I just want to understand if there's a relation
What's the...
between nice and meditating, or is it just completely different? It's only about...
No, I wouldn't say there's necessarily a correlation between being nice and meditating. I would say there's a correlation between being able to control your mind and having a greater awareness of reality and meditating. But you have to have pure intention. Having said that, if you meditate with pure intention, then yes, you develop godly qualities. But be careful, there's a dark side. So if you meditate with impure intentions, you develop ungodly qualities. But remember, God is just existence. This is something heartbreaking I had to learn. God's neutral. God's everything. And so there's a light and a dark side. Remember the force, right? Anybody ever thought about this? Yoga? Listen, I'm dead serious. No, nobody ever thought about that. I am dead serious. If you go back and watch The Empire Strikes Back, Yoda is teaching yoga. Literally. And he's talking about God. Right? And so Luke asks him, he's like, is the dark side more powerful? Yoda goes, no, quicker, easier, more seductive. There's a light and a dark side to God. Because God is everything. Where's the darkness come from? It had to come from God, the divine. It's everything's one. Gabriel said, you have a choice. Choose wisely.
You talk about meditating with pure intention. How do you know that your intentions are pure? Is it looking away from self and meditating towards broader understanding?
How about this? Remember I said, so the qualities of the ego are will. The qualities of the soul are will. And so the soul and the ego can have their wills can be aligned or their wills can be opposite. Remember, how about this? This is something to remember. All of the bodies, there's similarities to them. One of them, they have all self-preservation mechanisms. And so how they preserve themselves is they get food for their own existence and they defend their own existence. So the ego, what is its purpose? To place you in delusion and illusion. So it defends itself against what? Truth. Typically, egos do not like truth unless those truths, support its existence, right? And unless those truths support its illusions or whatever, its individuality. And it's the same with your emotions, right? Your emotions, the natural reaction is defend your emotions, defend your mind, defend your intellect. So you get to the causal plane and something that stuff neutralizes. Say your question again. I want to make sure I answer it precisely, though.
Just how do you understand that your intentions are pure?
Right, so this is what I was going to say. You decide that you're going to have pure intentions. And you know what you do? You pray. I was just thinking about this, and it's funny how everything comes full circle. At the beginning of class, and I realized this, I don't have a lot of devotion. But before class, you know what I did? I tap in. I always tap in. And I prayed for purity. I actually pray for purity. I pray, let me be pure. Let me channel you purely. Let me only do good. So you set that as an intention, and then you go to a source that can deliver it. And then what will happen is it'll reveal your impurities. It'll reveal your insincerities. And then you purify yourself of them as opposed to doubling down on them and defending them. This is a way you can know. I call it putting your ego on the altar. Meaning, how about this? I have a practice. Say someone insults me and they have real evil intent. You know what I do is I examine the insult for a kernel of truth. Even a kernel. Or if it's outright true and I embrace it, I accept it, I go for it. And I say, thank you for this opportunity to purify myself. And then the part that's not true, I'll put it down and I'll let it go. So that's how you set your intention, and then you act upon it. So set your intention, call for help, and act upon it. You know what? Here's the thing. Ultimately, we're all going to get what we want because we're God. Did I answer your question? Yeah, you know, here's the thing. I know I love it. It's juicy, but we're going to have to wrap up soon. But yes, throw me that question, then we'll get to you.
So, going back to, God desires movement, expression, and experience. So why does the ego exist?
Because without the ego, we'd be merged in oneness. So the ego is not an intrinsically evil thing. It just has a particular nature. Its nature is to put you into illusion, and it's going to defend itself because it's a body. It's self-preserving. That's the game. Because if we didn't have an ego, we'd all be merged in oneness. Right? Milda couldn't talk to each other because we'd be together. We'd all be the same person. Right? So that's the purpose of the ego, to play that game.
So the way to talk to each other, because like the illusion is that we have a body and that we are not all one thing, but just individuals. That's the illusion. So in order to connect with each other, is like meditation the way of connecting all together, or how do we achieve this connection? Like, I mean, like you said, we can't now like hug all each other and work as a unity because it's gonna be chaos. So how do we achieve this kind of connection? Is meditation the way?
How about this? Well, first of all, once you even get beyond the physical world, you can merge. Beings in the astral plane merge all the time. Higher up you go, the merge is even easier. So beings, anybody ever, I'm not into most channeling. 95% of it is either weak or garbage. But there are channel beings out there, and sometimes a being will come and say, hey, we're a collective. And you can go, there's a being in this channel called Michael, and he's a collective of 50 people. So because, remember, these are subtle bodies, and we use the vapor example, they can merge. So at the higher levels, they can merge. Just the FYI on that one, right? So at causal beings, they can merge. However, he said, how do we merge? Who was here last week? Right? Brother, you practice yoga, and yoga is a vast system of self-realization. You realize your true nature through neutralizing the mind. And there are many practices to do that. And the real way, you want to know the best way, is devote yourself to the Supreme. If you're purely devoted to the Supreme, she'll carry you home. I mean, she might carry you through hell first, but that's how that goes. So devote yourself to the Supreme, and you'll have the self. All right, I have a client, so I have to go. Thank you so much. Can we end with 3 ohms? Sahano Gunatu Sah